this is our last track for today, and actually it's the one I'm most excited about. After all the computing, after all the model, we start to ask ourselves, where are we going from here? Are we going to a new machine age? How will machines start to think like for the future as well? So today we are welcoming our special guest. We're very lucky to have Joscha Bach, a German scientist, AI researcher. His work has been across computation, cognitive architecture. He previously is the principal AI engineer at Intel Lab and is a world-renowned researcher, especially in machine consciousness. And here we go, Joscha.
Thank you, Ara, for inviting me in for the kind introduction. This question, whether machines should be conscious, of course, needs to be prefaced with why should they be conscious and could they be conscious? Can we understand what consciousness is? Are existing machines already conscious? And I think these are all very tricky questions, and I'm going to say only a few things about them. So now the clicker is not working anymore. Let's see. When we think about how to align machines with what humans want, it's a question that is currently gaining more and more prominence. And I find that there are mostly two directions in which this direction is being discussed. And one is politics, right? It's very important to control which opinions the AI is going to propagate into society. Who is going to have power over what the AI says, does things, in whose service it's working. And this is a very legitimate and important question. It's not that this is irrelevant and so on, but it is one question that is not just related to AI, but it's related to social media, it's related to equity in society, and it's related to the culture that we want to live in. And the other one is fear. There are a lot of people who have realized that at some point in the not too distant future, it is very likely that we will share the planet with systems that are actually smarter than us and maybe also more agentic than us. And this leads us into a situation where we ask ourselves, what is happening to us if that's happening? Are we going to face the same destiny as the chimpanzees did or many other species did on our planet? And I think that these perspectives of politics and fear are insufficient to understand alignment. And if you think about this, humans are usually not aligned with each other, right? It's very hard to align humans, and it's very difficult to pin down what human values actually are. Are human values something that we pretend to have while everybody is winging it secretly and is acting what they understand as their own local interest? To which degree is humanity alignable? There's also this question, are smart and self-aware humans aligned by others? Or do we align ourselves with what we understand ourselves to be and the world to be? And so is this reinforcement learning with human feedback actually the right way to align ourselves if we are autonomous and smart human beings? I don't think that's the case. And so if we think about systems that are actually smarter and more self-aware than us, I think it's quite questionable that we can just indoctrinate them with reinforcement learning to have the right opinions. First of all, we don't know what these right opinions are. But second of all, I don't think this works for systems that are smarter than us, right? For the same reasons that you cannot take a child that is very smart and lucid and indoctrinate it sustainably in a particular way, but you have to allow a smart agent to model the world by itself and to figure out what it can be in this world and then align itself with the world that it wants to exist. So if we accept this fact that it's very difficult to align systems that are smarter than us, then we'll find that autonomous AI is probably going to be able to relate to us only if it's conscious. Because what we care about is that we are conscious more than we are bipedal, that we have a humanoid shape and so on. The way in which we relate to the universe and to ourselves and to each other is fundamentally through our consciousness, to our ability to observe ourselves, observing, to experience the universe, to experience ourselves and each other, and to experience what matters to us in the world. And so I think that consciousness is not just the most important unsolved problem in philosophy and cognitive science, but it's also a very urgent problem to understand in the context of AGI and artificial intelligence. And if we look at consciousness in nature, what we find, it might be the easiest way to train a fully self-organizing system. Not necessarily the easiest way to train a system that runs on your GPU with a set of algorithms that we impose on the GPU, but if you have a system that is designing itself from the inside out, like our nervous system or the cells in our body, it seems to be that this is correlated to us being conscious, right? Humans cannot learn without being conscious. Complex animals cannot learn anything without being conscious. And so it might be that consciousness itself is something like a learning algorithm or an important part of it. So Ilya said last year that it may be that today's large neural networks are slightly conscious. And he did say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek and create a little bit of a stir on social media as a result. He also wrote a short story where he goes a little bit deeper into what this could imply. And most people, most observers agreed that this notion that LLMs could be conscious or slightly conscious is preposterous. So what does it mean? What would it mean that such a system is conscious? I think that if you look at DL systems, they clearly work very different from how brains work. They get coherent only in the limit after you train almost the entire internet into them. They require massive resources. And they are, on the other hand, the only thing that works at scale today. And while they might carry us all the way, basically get to a point where the LLM is better at AI research than human engineers, which is the core criterion for meaningful AGI. It would be surprising if this is the end state of the transformer is actually the correct solution to building minds. And there are some problems with the current DL approaches. Like, they're not very sample efficient. They take enormous amounts of training time. The models that come up are often structurally inadequate for the particular kinds of problems that you want to solve. Right? The ideally shaped model works in such a way that there's one model state corresponding to one world state. And in this sense, our models have way, way too many possible states that they could be in. And so that is related in large and small part to how they're hallucinating and reliability, but it also leads to dramatic inefficiency compared to what there could be. And of course, the model sizes are extremely large compared to what fits into human brains. But all these things have solutions, and they have solutions within the given paradigms. Right? We can overcome the sample inefficiency with data augmentation. If you compare the training time to the training time of a human being, then a few months sounds like nothing, right? It takes many years or even decades to train a capable human being. And you can use architecture search and other methods to get automatically to the architectures that you want, and you can compress models, and we are only at the beginning of this. So if we compare deep learning and human learning, we find there's a bunch of differences. Deep learning is based on linear algebra, and our own mind uses something like a language of thought that is not English, but something that is parallelizable and executable. And it's the language in which we learn how to use natural language, in which we learn to code and so on, and which we construct our perception. We are not designed, but we are self-organizing from the inside out. And we don't just have predictive coding, but we go for optimizing relevance and coherency based on our motivation and computational resources. And we basically learn semantics first instead of syntax first. And well, the LLMs learn semantics really in the long tail of style. And we learn style much, much later than semantics, right? So there's obviously a different loss function at work. And we continuously learn online. And we learn lifelong, just once per training period, and we have a much more integrated attention than the transformer does. So if we ask ourselves what it would be good for to have consciousness-like behavior, we could think about how can an AI system model its own performance in real time? How can it learn efficiently? How can it edit its own architecture? How can it discover its own self in the world by being coupled with the world and then noticing what itself is doing, and thereby predicts its own performance and its conceptualizes its relationship to the world and changes its own source code accordingly? How can it determine the context that it should be in? How can it become consistent with its perception of the world and with what it already knows and the reasoning of first principles that it's built? And these are things that are enabled in our own mind by our consciousness and things that are largely absent in the present architectures. Sometimes it's working. So what is consciousness? And informally, a lot of philosophers of mind say it's the experience of what it's like. This, of course, is not a real definition. It's indexically pointing at a certain phenomenon and a certain phenomenology, which means this is the phenomenon that we need to capture when we want to build a system that is conscious. It basically should plausibly report and self-report about a feeling what it's like, and it shouldn't do this like an LLM in a way that is indistinguishable from a deepfake, right? It should do this spontaneously in a way that is plausible in its structure. Intelligence is different from consciousness. It's the ability to make models, and intelligence itself is not the same thing as rationality. Rationality is the ability to reach goals, right? And a lot of very intelligent people are not very rational because while intelligence typically happens in the service of control, we often sometimes use the prosthesis for when we are not very rational, that we make better models. And sentience is also something slightly different. I use it as a term that denotes basically the ability to understand what you're doing, understand what you are in relationship to the world, and understand the place that you have in the world, so your behavior becomes meaningful. And the self is a model of the system's own agency, right? You model yourself as an agent. And the mind is the set of functionalities that generates the model of the universe and the self. So it's like a larger architecture. And if we think about the current LLMs, we find that they're not sentient, but are they conscious? Right, so we might have to ask ourselves, how does consciousness emerge in a biological system? The phenomenal consciousness is one aspect of it. It means we are aware of content. The second one is we are aware of the way in which we attend to the content. So we know it's perceptual. Is it an interpretation of the perception that we can change? The perception itself cannot be changed. Or is it an idea that we can arbitrarily manipulate? Or a memory that we can retrieve? And then we have reflexive consciousness, which means we are aware of the fact that we are aware. In addition to this, we develop a first-person perspective. And while we're in dreams, we usually don't have that first-person perspective in the same way. It's a model of our own agency that creates a perspective onto the world in our cognition. And when we look at the philosophy of consciousness in the context of AI, we find that there are a number of takes that people have. Right? For instance, the notion that physicalism is false is often taken to be idealism, consciousness being primary. Everything is basically at the root of the world is a conspiracy that only exists in a mind, that itself has nothing outside of itself. And then the idea that there are separate domains, a physical domain and a mental domain, is usually called dualism. And dualism has this issue that you don't really know how these two layers interact with each other, because physics is causally closed in itself. So how would consciousness change things in the world and make you say, oh my God, I'm feeling something, because that would need to move your mouth in some way and affect your brain states, right? And if we try to understand non-computational notions of consciousness, we would need to extend physics, because all existing physics is computational. And a number of physicists like Roger Penrose argue that we need to find extensions to present physics to explain consciousness in it. Then there are a bunch of people who basically say that consciousness cannot be explained at all. Mysterianism is the position that something cannot be explained if Noam Chomsky cannot explain it. And Noam Chomsky subscribes to this position, and he failed at explaining consciousness, so he strongly believes that it might be impossible to explain it. And there's also this pragmatic approach, which basically say, let's study brain states, let's study models of what people do, and eventually it will gradually fall into place. And this pragmatic approach is something that you often find in neuroscience, for instance, the work of Stanislav Dehaene and so on, who have adopted some ideas from philosophy like global workspace theory very loosely as a framework to look at things, and then hope that gradually it will fall into place. And then there's also this idea that it represents a functionality that we can point to. So it might be a control model of our attention, as Graciano says, or a function that is looking for a low energy state of your models, like Joscha Bengio says. Or it does not actually exist, it's just an illusion. A number of people have argued, like Christoph Koch, that only a physical system can be conscious, and a simulation cannot possibly be conscious. And I think that these people have got it completely wrong way around. Like cells and brains are physical mechanisms. They cannot be conscious. There's no experience in mechanisms, right? And consciousness itself is a simulated property. It's the other way around. Only in a simulation can you be conscious. Consciousness is a virtual state, I think. Consciousness exists as if. Because brains and cells are not conscious and cannot be conscious, it would be very useful them to know what it would be like if there was a person that cared, what it would be like if there was something that attended to the world and made models based on that. And so in the patterns of their activations across each other, they create a simulation of what that would be like. And that simulation doesn't have to be physically accurate, and it doesn't have to be truthful, right? It can be something that's completely fudged together, that does magical things in it, because it's only a model, a simulation, a simulacrum. And within that simulation, you can experience the world. You can feel, you can experience yourself to be a person, despite there not being a person, despite there only being activation patterns in the interaction between cells in your brain. And so I think consciousness is a virtual property. It's not a physical property. The people who think that simulations cannot be conscious have gotten it exactly the wrong way around. And I call this position virtualism. And what consciousness does for us, it basically makes sense of what we perceive. It integrates everything into a coherent model, and in some sense, an operator that our brain is discovering to make us more coherent. It maintains an indexed memory of what it attended to, and it's able to solve all those tasks where gradient descent is not sufficient, right? If you do perception only with gradient descent, you don't need construction, and you don't need a memory that tells you where you're coming from when you converge. But sometimes gradient descent is not sufficient. Sometimes the space has too many dimensions to be conquerable with gradient descent, or you don't have the solution yet. And in that case, you need to construct. And when you construct, you need to remember what steps you did, so you can undo them and retrace your steps and improve on them. And all this functionality seems to be stuff that is enabled by our constructive perception, by this ability to create an internal interface to our perception and then manipulate the perception and repair it. And this seems to be one of the main functionalities that is enabled in our minds by consciousness. So I think we can understand attention as something like an agent, like a conductor of the mental orchestra that is listening to all the other instruments in our cognitive architecture superficially, and they also listen to each other. And then in the same way as a conductor brings order into the orchestra, listens to dissonances, and then tries to harmonize them. And this attention agent is not the only thing that exists in our mind. It coexists with agents that produce perceptual contents and that control behavior via motivation. That is a very similar perspective as Joscha formulated in his paper, The Consciousness Prior. Right? It's basically a function that is being discovered in our own mind, and that enables something like a phase transition in which we suddenly are able to get the world to plop into place, where we have basically a low energy model that can be in resonance with the environment around us. It's that thing when you wake up in the morning and you realize that you are in a room where everything makes sense, and you basically manage to organize all the features that you have in your perception into a coherent hierarchy of objects until your mind becomes a game engine that is able to track your percepts. And this purpose of consciousness, to create coherence and perception, I think is its core function initially. And then over time, we build more and more functionality that allows us to go beyond this present context by building expectations for the next scene and remember past scenes and build a model of our life and our relationship that we have as an individual to the universe. Right, and so self and consciousness are not the same, but they are closely related. The self is a model of our own agency. It's downstream from our motivation, and it shapes our agency via identification. And the self basically is a representation of a discovery that our model contents are driving our behavior. It's basically when we see there is a model that actually causes our behavior, we gain a first-person perspective, and we notice that our own thoughts are being generated as a result of our previous thoughts. We are the things that is generating these thoughts, and these thoughts drive internal and external behavior. Right? This is how we discover ourselves in their interaction with the world.